Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, I'm going to be ranking my personal thoughts on every single Pokemon that is so far confirmed for Scarlet and Violet, as well as the ones that are leaked to be available in Scarlet and Violet. This is only going over returning Pokemon, so if you're a fan of seeing where Ceruledge is ranked, it's not in this video, give it a month. But if you guys enjoy this type of content, you want to see more like it, of course, leave a like on the video and subscribe. Also, let me know down below if you guys want to see a version of this for VGC. I would love to personally do one. It'll be next week's video, most likely. Again, it just depends on if you guys want to see it or not. But with that said, though, again, this video is going to be huge spoilers. We're going over stuff that's leaked content, not confirmed. We're not going to go over anything that's like speculatory. So, for example, again, no Ceruledge discussion, no Farigiraf discussion here. It's just for Pokemon that we have a precedent for. Now, obviously, no new abilities, nerfs, whatever, none of that's accounted for. This is just off of their previous history. So basically what I decided to do here, though, is I decided to tier these Pokemon off of how I thought they would be going into Scarlet and Violet. And there were a few different criteria that I used. One, they have to be on the leaked list, or at least already confirmed. B, they need to be Pokemon that are at least better than Luvdisc, which is, in my opinion, the worst fully evolved Pokemon on here. That's debatable, of course, there are a lot of bad ones, but it's my personal opinion on the worst. The third one is it has to be a fully evolved Pokemon, or at least intended to be. For example, even though Girafarig would have qualified as a better NFE than Luvdisc anyway, Girafarig was intended to be a fully evolved Pokemon, therefore it's on the list even if it was worse. Also, for the NFE Pokemon, well actually, for other stuff like Ursaring, of course, again, it was intended to be fully evolved, so it's on here. Or for actual fully evolved Pokemon, stuff like Sunflora, Sunflora is probably the worst one if I'm going to be honest. But the point being is that it's a fully evolved Pokemon, so it's on here. So with that said, let's get into the tier list. Now we do have two different tier lists to go over today. The first one, of course, being the pre-home metagame. So everything at the very top of this page that you see here are all Pokemon that are either A, confirmed for home transfer, or B, these are Pokemon that are at the very least regional forms of Pokemon that seem to be confirmed in the game. And with stuff like Sword and Shield, for example, the 11 forms were all home transfers. So I'm assuming it's stuff like Galar Slowbro, because Slowbro is confirmed in the game. And stuff like Alolan Persian, because Persian's in the game, will probably be Pokemon that are only going to be home exclusive. So there was a little bit of speculation on this part, to be fair, mostly just off of the fact that a lot of Pokemon, like for example, Zoroark was shown on this list, and we already have confirmation that Hisuian Zoroark is in Scarlet and Violet. This is official news, but it was not on the leaked list. So whether this was just forgotten and maybe just a couple of Hisuian forms were left off, or if it's just all forms, or even just some random forms. We don't know for certain which ones are or aren't, so I put them all in the home transfer thing. Because as I said, we already have confirmation that Hisuian Zoroark is in the game. This is confirmed by Pokemon themselves, this isn't speculation, this is confirmed. We also threw on some Pokemon here, of course, like, for example, the Hisuian starters. Now, I do want to point these out specifically because the Hisuian starters are the only ones of these three that actually did make it in. We don't see Jotonian, Typhlosion, or Unova Samurott in these games. It's only those three. They're the only three forms that, from the leaked list, have any actual confirmation on what made it in or not. So you'll have to just, of course, bear with that. If that's wrong, so be it. This video will age like butter or milk, but the point being is that this list right here are all the Pokemon that should be coming once home transfers around. I did make this a whole separate list because with Sword and Shield again and BDSP and Legends Arceus, home transfer was not available right away. It took a little bit, especially for BDSP, to actually make home transfer compatible. So I doubt that that's going to be changing with Scarlet and Violet. So these are all Pokemon you can look forward to on the later lists. I do have a separate tier list made specifically, and I'll go into that one second in the second half of this video, over the Pokemon that I think will be impacted and where these will all end up. But I did feel like it was best to establish first off what our pre-home meta is going to look like. Now, I don't actually think a lot's going to really change. As far as old Pokemon go, the only one I actually think will be banned is Dragapult. Dragapult does have a few things going out of its favor. For one, Terrassal's going to give it a physical ghost move, which would be amazing for your Dragon Dance sets. And while some people might be saying, oh, Phantom Force is pretty good, yeah, but this is a physical ghost move that doesn't have to wait 2 turns. So that will already be a huge thing for physical Dragapult. It's going to be insane as far as buffs go. This also has the potential to just utilize maybe like a Terrassal fighting and cover common checks like Tyranitar, for example. And Dragapult has the offensive capabilities to really actually make that work, considering you could always go with something like a Phantom Force, Dragon Darts, Terrestrial Fighting, or Fire, but probably Fighting, and then Dragon Dance, and just start mauling pretty much everything that's viable in this tier. So I really doubt that Dragapult will actually stay around. I think there's a couple other Pokemon that could maybe be banned, like Garchomp, for example. But I do have hopes that there are a couple things in this tier that might actually help with that. Maybe, for example, Intimidate Ments might end up adopting a more defensive role to handle the Garchomps, or you might even see stuff like a Powdon being a good defensive check. Corviknight's pretty decent enough, at least, and Weavile is a great offensive response. So while I think that it would definitely be a very oppressive Pokemon, and it's a very clear, like, that is the clear S tier in my opinion, that and Weavile, I do think that at the very least there's a chance that Garchomp might be allowable, so we'll go with it. There are some other good Pokemon in here too. For example, I think that Breloom would be pretty decent. In fact, I think that teams with like Breloom Garchomp will actually be amazing for this meta, because Breloom can be utilized to handle putting Pokemon to sleep pretty quickly, and it's great for stuff like Azu, which is also one of the better defensive fairies we have. You throw on those two, and then you get a good response like a Magnezone, for example, and I think you're sitting really pretty in this meta personally. There are some other decent Pokemon there, like Gengar, for example. Sylveon is going to probably be the best defensive fairy as far as this generation goes, at least assuming that we don't have any new Pokemon introduced that are better. Considering the fact that our next best runner-up is stuff like Florges. Edomorse is decent too, but again, it's not post-home, and even still, I think Sylveon will be a better defensive fairy at least. And Clefable not being in these games actually does hurt a lot as far as OU goes. Same as Ferrothorn. So the meta's going to be very different. As far as, again, the best Pokemon I think will probably be Garchomp, then Weavile, and then I don't know what will be after that. This feels like a really scuffed version of BDSP OU, if I'm going to be honest. So I think there's going to be a lot of merit for stuff like Gengar as well, but Tyranitar will be a little annoying for sure, especially because I think that will actually be a really good offensive Pokemon. But Gengar will still probably be good, Scizor will probably still be great, and it's probably going to be one of the better steals in this format. Though Magnezone, again, will also be sitting really pretty. Less so just because it needs to trap Scizor, but more so for trapping Corviknight, I think will be the big thing. But regardless, this meta will be pretty interesting. One thing that I will note is I think that as far as Pokemon that sit in the next set of tiers, there's not really anything I think that will necessarily be going to the OU range from here. But there are a lot of decent Pokemon I think might have viability. Now, I didn't merge together UU and RU, and I do want to go into really quickly why I did that. OU, I think, typically is a pretty easy meta to figure out what's going to be at least really viable in it, or at least somewhat viable. As far as UU and RU goes, this could honestly blend together, and it's going to be a sort of trickle down as we go through the tiers, because certain things will become more viable because of other things missing, and then that will cause the lower tiers to, again, adapt because of that. So I do think that these tiers are a little hard to predict just a single tier for, so I did combine UU and RU and then NU and PU into their own tiers. I feel like that was the best way to handle this. But as far as UU and RU Pokemon go, we do have a lot of interesting options. Now, as far as the best Pokemon among this cluster, I think that it's probably going to be Crocodile. I think Crocodile will actually feature quite literally as the lander T of this sort of UU tier. Some other decent Pokemon in this range will be stuff like Amoonguss, assuming that the drowsiness theory that Wolfie was mentioning looked probable from the last big trailer isn't a thing. If drowsiness is a thing, then it kind of depends on how it functions, but I think Amoonguss could still actually have a place in the meta, especially if it's dropping defenses. That could be really good for setup sweepers or just choice mons. Nidoqueen will obviously be amazing. I do think that Nidoking will actually be an OU Pokemon. It's probably going to be one of the better special breakers, and it handles a lot of these Pokemon pretty well. But Nidoqueen, I think, will be really decent in the UUs here. If Nidoking goes to UU, then I think that Nidoqueen will just go to RU, so it's still in this cluster either way. I think that realistically, most of these Pokemon I could see being either UU or RU. The really only exceptions I think are here, for mons that I think definitively will be OU and UU among this list will be Gyarados, Nidoqueen, Arcanine, Venomoth, Slowking, and Crocodile. I think everything else has a chance at really either tier, if I'm going to be honest. There's some stuff that I think is kind of easy to lean towards, though. Like, for example, Medicham will probably be like an RU fighting type, or like Salazzle will probably be like an RU Pokemon. Mimikyu will probably be UU, but it really does depend. The pre-home meta is going to be kind of rough on these tiers especially. But if we go down into the NUP range, we do have a lot of Pokemon here, actually. The low tiers, while they probably won't actually exist in a pre-home metagame, there's still a lot of Pokemon I think that could inhabit them. Now, there are a few Pokemon I think it will get inherently more viable looking at some stuff that's post-home. For example, I think a Zoroark in a pre-home meta will probably be a very high contention for UU-RU status. But I think that ultimately it will end up going down as the meta evolves into the NUPU tier. So I did tier this accordingly. This is off of a post-home meta, if that makes sense. But I separated the mons that would actually be post-home just to show what's actually missing in a tier. So I didn't change Zoroark's rating because of that. I felt like that was worth mentioning here. It didn't really affect any of the UU-RU or the OU Pokemon in my opinion. Maybe Nidoking at best was a little high-tiered, but it still definitely was a mon that could belong in there. But there are some pretty noteworthy things in this sort of low tier. there's a lot of garbage, like for example Pawniard is here, but sadly Pawniard will be one of the better offensive darks for some reason. I couldn't tell you why. This meta has so few of them. But as far as like actual standouts in this tier go, I do think there are a few. I think a Honchkrow will be amazing, and I could actually see it getting banned from the NU tier. It'll definitely be NU. I do not think it'll get PU even without Pursuit. His Magus will be amazing, and I think that this will probably be a good Terrestrial Fairy Pokemon, being a ghost that could utilize Terrestrial Fairy, Dazzling Gleam, and just start snowballing opponents. I think it could be pretty good, but even still, again, there's not a lot of great ghost checks in this low tier. Pawniard will probably be a really good one, I think, actually. Zoroark too, but I think that if Zoroark does go to the UU-RU range, then Pawniard will probably be unironically one of the better ones. Houndoom will probably be decent. There's not a lot of good waters here, and even still, it could definitely go for a Terrestrial Grass, and I think it's a mon that doesn't really need to benefit from just going for Terrestrial Fire or Dark. Though Dark Terrestrial could also be terrifying in this tier. I think the biggest thing though for Terrestrial Grass would be it can handle stuff like, for example, if Whiscash for some reason it's being viable. Terrestrial Ground also could be kind of a thing for Marini potentially, but again, I think at that point you just go Dark. Thankfully though, really the only actual water ground that would be pretty viable in this tier would be Quag, and I think it'll be NU for sure. However, at the very least, you could definitely go with, again, a Terrestrial Dark set and then just massacre that anyway. So I think Houndoom will probably actually be one of the better offensive Pokemon in the NU tier. I think the Ursaring will also be really cool as a Guts Violet Pokemon. This will be insanely bulky, and assuming that there's an actual form of recovery on this Pokemon, which would be really cool to give this recovery. I think it, honestly, I don't know why this doesn't have Slack Off already, but if it does get that, I think it's an easy RU Pokemon. I only do mention that because, again, we don't really know what they might give to Ursaluna, which then might make it an egg move, but regardless though, I do think that Ursaring has a generation now where it can finally be a viable Pokemon. As far as other standouts, I think Cole will be pretty good, but I think it's going to be like PU standout, and that's really it. We have our untiered Pokemon, of course. These do not change in either tier list, so I'm not even going to bother going too in depth on them. I will mention a couple things though. Jigglypuff and Riolu are the two mons that I mentioned are here exclusively for VGC. Murkrow is noteworthy enough to where it's definitely here for VGC, but I think that if anything in this tier, it's probably the best Pokemon to have a chance of singles viability in my opinion. And Dugtrio is here because I think Arena Trap is just not even going to be allowed. I think that OU's had enough of testing Arena Trap. They know that they don't like it. I don't think they're going to go down that rabbit hole again. But even if they do, this is such a weak to Dugtrio metagame, there's no fucking way it lasts. As far as the post-home metagame though, this does change a bit. For one, we have an actual Ubers tier now that is not just Koraidon, Miraidon, and Dragapult. So that will be fun. We'll have some standouts like Dalaga, Origin and Regular, Palkia Origin and Regular, Giratina. We'll have Lando I, Gren, potentially Ashgren. I left this on here just because we don't know necessarily about what forms are going to be in. I think though this one probably will actually get cut, just considering the fact it's similar to Flood Eternal. Just a little bit different to be fair, because Flood Eternal was an intended event that never got released. Meanwhile, Ash Greninja at the very least did get released at one point, but I think I think Spiky or Pichu is a better comparison. It's probably not going to end up being in the game though, but I did show it on here anyway. As far as the OU tier goes, we actually do see the OU tier fill out a little bit. For one, we get some decent offensive Pokemon of the tier. Zapdos, both forms, will be really amazing here, especially Zapdos Galar, I think will be really viable, especially with Lander T and Salamence, both, in my opinion, being OU Pokemon, and Zapdos Galar could take advantage of both and go for a Terrestrial Flying set and take advantage of that with Defiant. No longer be weak to either Pokemon going for Terrestrial Flying. I think it's a pretty good meta for it. As far as regular Zapdos though, this will be another addition to the Garchomp checks, and I could maybe see this going for some sort of Terrestrial Water on rain teams. However, most likely it's probably just going to go for Terrestrial Flying Hurricanes. Could be a really cool addition for rain actually. Tornadus Therian, I could actually see also getting banned. This was a mon that got banned from Natdex OU for being too strong with Z moves, as well as having plot now. And I could see a similar issue coming up with Terrestrial for Torn, because it would quite literally be taking over that same sort of role, giving Torn a more offensive presence, while also then being able to set up with nasty plots, and then stall break teams really easily with like a mono flying set with Taunt, Plot, U-turn, flying move, or even just like a Focus Blast or Heat Wave for steel types. You can obviously just go with a pivot set for long term. The point being is that Torn will have a lot going for it. I could see this one getting banned. Of anything here, I think it's the most likely banned for a post-home metagame, assuming that Garchomp somehow lasts post-home, which I'll be honest, that also seems pretty unlikely. There are still a few checks though to it in the tier. For example, Slowbro keeps Teleport as a move in its moveset, Slowbro would be pretty good in both metas. As I said, Hippowdon will be a great one, Weavile. So there are checks that exist, but there aren't a lot of great ones, and I think that depending on Terrestrial stab rolls, this could be a mon that ends up getting banned. Assuming they don't just ban Terrestrial. That's another route they could go, and that would definitely make the Torn not a ban-worthy Pokemon in my opinion, because there are enough options for counterplay that do exist, such as the Rodent forms. We have Zapdos, T-Tar, etc. At least for soft counterplay, because T-Tar could definitely get super powered or just get U-turn around until it dies. But the point being is there's a lot of actual responses, stuff like Weavile too, so I think that'll be fine. Sneasler's a new introduction to competitive, same as Enamoris and Ursaluna. I think of the three here, that Enamoris has the one that I think could get the most drastically better going into Scarlet and Violet, but I think that outright Ursaluna will be the best. I think it's going to go either Ursaluna, Sneasler, Enamoris, or Enamoris, Ursaluna, Sneasler. I could see a world where Enamoris also gets banned. It kind of depends on how they adapt its signature move, Springtide Breeze, I think it's called. The point being is if they make that into like a contrary move where it's going to end up taking advantage of contrary and then start stat boosting like crazy, I could see this mon actually just getting banned to Ubers. Its typing is incredible, it has great stats, it's also really good physically too, with 115 attack, and it could take advantage of stuff like Lando and Salamence, and then go for Terrestrial Fairy and be a really deadly offensive fairy. Because if we look at the fairy switch-ins in this tier, there's not a lot, and this gets coverage options for both for 4 times, being Magnezone with Earth Power and Scizor for Mystical Fire. The only other real fairy switch-ins are stuff like Gloking, and yeah, Gloking Galar. Oh, you know what? That is Gloking. I'm fucking stupid. The point is that Gloking is a decent one, Pex is a decent one, and these will probably be more so what your typical Enamoris switch-ins end up being. But this still does get Calm Mind, and it could definitely take advantage of those. You could also just pair this with something like a Magnezone, and that would be a really incredible combination. So I think Enamoris, again, has the highest ceiling to be a really good Pokemon or even ban-worthy. But I also think that even if they just keep it as it is right now, it will still be an OU Pokemon, even if they change nothing of its moveset, except for just cutting the signature move and just let that be that. We get into our UU tier up next though. Oh, right, actually, I did forget a couple of things. Victini will be amazing. I think this is also another Pokemon that could get banned. Depends on how Terrestrial interacts with items. Torn, I don't think will mind if it has to give up an item slot. It'll be unfortunate for offensive sets, but it's whatever. Volcarona and Victini though, I forgot Volcarona the pre-home too, but Volcarona and Victini could take advantage of boots and become nightmares as fire, or even just a coverage set. Victini especially, because its stabs alone would hit nearly everything here. The point being though is I don't think they'll necessarily get banned, but there'll be some Pokemon I think that people have to watch out for. When we get into UU though, we do get a few decent Pokemon. For one, the UU-RU range gains a couple of really cool Pokemon such as Galar Moltres and regular Moltres. These are both really incredible Pokemon this generation, especially regular Moltres. It's a great stall Pokemon for teams, and it's a great balanced Pokemon too. Enamoris Therian I think will actually end up in the UU tier. I think it'll be a really solid UU Pokemon with like boot sets with Calm Mind, Draining Kiss filler, because its special attack is pretty great. I think it's like 125 or 135. Its speed is terrible, but I think this will be a really interesting Trick Room Pokemon, which just boots 3 attacks with Draining Kiss, Earth Power, Mystical Fire. You could maybe ditch one of the coverage options, of course, but I think it'll need both for poisons and steals respectively, especially when Bronzong will probably be a UU-RU steal this has to worry about. Even if it's RU, I think that Bronzong will still be used in UU to check Enamoris, because it's a pretty decent check as far as the low tier goes. I think that really the only things that I could say that would be definitively better would maybe be like Glowbro, because Glowbro with AV could be a really strong check. Hisui and Goodra could actually also be a really good one, considering while it is neutral to Fairy, unlike the others, its Spinef is so incredible that at least for special variants, this could be a really good check, and you could just go for like a Steel Beam and Massacre it, or I think it gets Iron Tail too, which would be incredible. The point being is I think it'll be a decent check. As far as other options go, Hisui and Zoroark, I think, of the post-home meta will probably be the first suspect for UU. I think it will be a UU Pokemon that maybe gets to the UU-BL range. Similar to Staraptor, but I think the difference is that Staraptor will start the tier at OU and then maybe go down to OU-BL once the meta adds stuff like Zapdos, for example. So Raptor I think will be a similar case, but I think the difference being though is that Zoroark will just go to UU and get suspect tested. I think that Staraptor will wait until Zapdos gets to UU, which to OU, which I guess is the same time to be fair. But the point being is I think Raptor will have an actual presence in OU for a little bit. Zoroark I don't think will, and it will just kind of be a niche Pokemon, at least until DLCs add more Pokemon. Once we start getting Pokemon like Lotties, for example, where that speed tier matters a lot more, that's one thing. But this speed tier really only actually matters for Gengar at this point, so we don't have enough that will actually encourage Zoroark usage, if that makes sense. But we do need a few more Pokemon that can really bluff that typing, I think. And especially, again, Lottie will be a huge thing, because not only will it speed tie Lottie, but it will also be able to bluff Lottie, and their counterplay is so different. So I think that will be a huge thing in my opinion, because really the only common counterplay would be like T-Tar, and even still they both get coverage options for it. So I'm not too concerned about T-Tar at that point. So I do think that'll probably be like the first UU suspect. Whether it gets banned or not, I don't know. Same for Hisui and Lilligant, actually. Another really good Galar on a Hisuiamon. Especially with Hustle and the decent speed tier this has, it might have Durant Syndrome, but I think that'll be more so for RU into UU. So I think either way, it's in this cluster. It could maybe prove me wrong. To be fair, this does have some things that it would actually be really good for in OU. For example, this would be decent for at least opposing Pokemon such as Azu, for example. At least on non-tap super sets, you could Scarf this, and it would be a great way to handle a lot of just generally offensive. Well, actually, you wouldn't really need to Scarf it in this meta. It doesn't really offer you anything, actually, because I was gonna say Weavile, but that just Ice Shards you anyway. I do think that there's enough Pokemon that do actually like really wall Hisui Lilligant though, so I think this UU RU range is where it's gonna stay. There's still counterplay, of course. Mungus will be a great option for this, for example. I think that as far as other options go, Chelseamoss Cloyster will at least put some good pressure on it, or even just Ice Shard Cloyster will. You'll have stuff like Golisopod, which will probably be pretty decent. Again, I think it'll probably be more RU range though, which is why I think a Hisui and Lilligant will probably get suspect tested. As far as other noteworthy things, there's not a lot else. I think that Hisui and Braviary is probably the last one, which will, I think, just be a really good RU mon. I don't think it'll be UU by any means, but who knows. We get into our NUPU range though, and not a lot really changes here. I do want to mention though, I know a lot of people really think that Arcanine's typing is terrible. I think it'll actually just be a really good choice scarf option for like an RU tier, for an NU tier. The typing offensively at that point will be really good, and there's not a lot of good ground types if we look at the post-home meta even. Quagsire will be an amazing check to this, for example. But outside of Quagsire, the checks go to like Hippopotas with Slack Off, Palisand, I guess, but that still risks taking a fire move really well, and its Fizz Def isn't really that great. Sandaconda is kind of a soft check, but not really. Like, the checks get really bad. So I do actually think that Hisui and Arcanine will be pretty decent in the NU tier, albeit I don't think it'll be like some top tier Pokemon, but I think like an A-, B+ Pokemon would be pretty reasonable. As far as other Pokemon, PU will get Charizard, which will be great. It's just budget Moltres. I think NU is where the Hisuian Electrode will end up. Regular Electrode will just be a PU mon, but Hisui Electrode I think could actually, again, similar to the Zoroark, it'll probably be an early suspect test. The typing is really good for the tier, but it really depends on what moves this thing gets. This is one of those things similar to Enamoris where I think it could end up easily being an RU Pokemon, but off of its moveset right now, I don't buy it. Chloroblast could maybe be the deal breaker, especially if it does end up getting something to take advantage of that. But again, I don't really know where I see this Pokemon ending up. As far as other noteworthy Pokemon, there's not really a lot else here. There's not really a lot else here. I guess Hisui and Decidueye is another one that I think could have a high ceiling, high floor, on a low floor. Depends on if they give this thing a good fighting move. Even still, I think at best it's an NU Pokemon. It's probably like an RU Pokemon. We'll see stuff like Delphox in here as well. Delphox will be a great NU Pokemon, actually. I think this will probably be one of the best. It's going to have issues with Houndoom, obviously. Again, I think that Terrestrial Dark will be amazing on that Pokemon in this tier, and it's going to probably be one of the better offensive Pokemon, in my opinion, to use Terrestrial here. But who knows? I did skim over a couple things in UU, though, that I did remember being Cleavor. Cleavor is the big one I care about, and then Basculegion, but I'll get into that in a bit. Cleavor, I think, will be really strong into UU as well, just a really good breaker. Definitely not an RU Pokemon. I think this will be UU with OU niche, similar to Nidoking. Basculegion female, I'm thinking will be RU, meanwhile male I think will be NU. So I did actually separate them on this tier list. It is separated accordingly. And then Overcool, I think it'll probably get moves to make it RU, especially when Egg moves get into play. But I could maybe see it being an NU Pokemon as well, because I think the difference is that even if both Quillfish and Overcool get like the same move buffs, Quillfish might end up actually taking over that slot and then being put in the RU tier instead, just because of a Firelight, which could actually be a really cool buff for it. But we'll have to see where that goes. One thing I will say, if you guys are paying attention and if you commented it down below before getting to this part, good on you. But I do think that there is one Pokemon I know that I missed. And if you know it, comment down below, and I'll pin the first comment I see that noticed it. But I know I missed at least one Pokemon, being Blissey, which clear OU Pokemon, especially in this tier. There's a lot of good special threats and not really a lot of good special walls. It's really just stuff like Sylveon and Catapex, but it really needs to be physical for stuff like Zapdos, for example, as well as actually definitely for Scizor too, to be honest. But it could maybe be a spin-off wall for certain Pokemon, but I think a Blissey will probably be in this range. It could maybe be a UU Pokemon as well, like with Chansey, for example. But I think that Blissey will yet again have another generation where it's better than Chansey because of boots. Boots have been such a good thing for it. But we'll have to see what happens. Hopefully you guys enjoy this tier list though, and if you did, leave a like below and subscribe. I know this wasn't really a tier list, but it's in the tier list style where I ranked all the Pokemon, and instead of ranking them live for you guys, I discussed my thoughts. But let me know what you guys think. I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff to disagree, and I tried to skim over stuff because truthfully this could have been a 3.5 hour video going over every single Pokemon's roles, but I want to save that for when we know more so about like what moves new Pokemon are going to get, what new Pokemon from Paldea are going to introduce, so I don't want to go too into the theory territory, but I did want to give my initial impressions off though, because I did think that was interesting enough to go over. So with that said, shout out to our channel members, of course, being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Mia, and Zeke0. If you guys want to become a channel member, click on the link down below and join, as well as my links to my Discord and Twitter if you guys want to stay up to date on videos. With that said, I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, peace out, guys.